Now, Dr. Shaheda Omar is with the Teddy Bear Foundation for Abused Children, and she says adolescent pregnancy has negative social and economic effects on the girls, those around them, and of course also the babies that they bear. She joins us now to discuss that a bit further. Dr. Omar, thank you so much for your time. As always, we just saw that story now, just one example of many, according to latest statistics, of girls who bear the brunt of this responsibility of bringing a child into the world. And not only do they have the responsibility of becoming mothers at a very, very young age, they also then take on the stigma and the shame from society that still to this day look down their noses at young women who have children at such a young age. How is this still an issue? Why is stigma still one of the main issues when we talk about teenage pregnancies?
Well, I think stigma, because it's still not unintended. I think it's unintended. It's not deliberate, where people always frown upon a young girl who's given birth to a child, who's a child herself. And obviously people would question that there was no measures taken to protect herself. She did not, that she purposefully let herself into the situation. And as a result of that, often, the dropout of school, the lack of opportunities, and even if one looks at faith-based organizations and other people in the community, where peers as well would look down upon this young girl because she's made a mistake and she's, responsible for what has happened. So I think that is just the general approach or response from society. But the important thing to understand is that the sacrifices, the sufferings, the pain, the trauma, the compromises that this young girl has to go through. You spoke about social and economic consequences and the implications in terms of her trajectory. I think, yes, the social stigma is one thing to look at, but just the effect, the lack of self-worth, the low self-esteem, the lack of opportunities, and assuming such huge responsibility at a tender age, where suddenly the element of fun, play, all that is disrupted, and this young child that is given birth is robbed of a childhood, is robbed of innocence, is robbed of play. And for me, that is more critical than anything else, because the health implications that this young girl may suffer, and as well as the infant that comes into the world, because we're already looking at an intergenerational pattern of social implications, health implications, economic implications, where the educational opportunities, career pathing, gaining adequate employment or generating income to provide not only for this young girl herself, the mother, but also the infant, and the burden, the overwhelming burden on the family is something that really needs to be unpacked. It needs to be addressed urgently, as you've so eloquently articulated how many young girls are giving birth, and just looking at the tender ages where they're giving birth. And of course,
yeah, indeed. That indeed was one of the shocking parts of that new report, that about 1,000 of them just here in the Gauteng province were under the age of 14. And really all of those things that you mentioned then becomes a vicious cycle, doesn't it? We then have a family pushed into poverty perhaps as well, because there's an extra mouth to feed, and then that child grows up in a similar situation, and it just gets worse from there in many situations. But how is it that in 2021 we're still having this conversation? Because it wasn't so long ago, perhaps the previous generation or the generation before that, that young women or girls were being sent away. They disappear for a year because they'd fallen pregnant, and they come back and there's another child brought into the family, and it's almost an unspoken thing that this is this child's child, as it were. I mean, that wasn't so long ago. How do we stop that? How do we stop having to have this conversation? If society is looking down their noses at this girl or this child for making a mistake, why are we still not giving this child the tools within which not to make that mistake, to be able to protect herself? Why is there no access to comprehensive sexual education, access to affordable health services? Why are we not equipping our girls to be able to prevent this kind of a situation?
So you've raised such critical things, Marcel, and you speak about the tools, equipping children, and I think the conversation is not happening. As we speak, the conversation is still a taboo subject. Instead of propagating sex and sexuality as something that is special, that is sacred, that is supposed to be revered, and that one's body, one needs to start, respect one's body before you can start respecting any other body. I think those are the conversations that are not happening. If we just look at the whole furore with the comprehensive sexual education that the Department of Basic Education was challenged with and faced last year with. So we're still finding that in many schools or educational facilities, these conversations may be happening, but in the more marginalized communities, the more disadvantaged communities, it's not happening. There are not sufficient resources being allocated. If you ask the question, why? Yes, because we don't have resident school social workers, psychological services. Life orientation is treated very lightly, where children do not have a platform or an opportunity to engage in dialogue, and they're not given permission to ask questions. Their sources of information are from their peers, from the internet, from TV, social media, and that is what is happening, where we're failing our children. But even on another level, where parents, significant others, actually do not know how to have these conversations. And that is why we see year after year, and even a decade after or decades after, this pattern of children continue to be subjected to this kind of trauma, because it
Dr. Shaheda Omar, I must apologize. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and we have to end our conversation there. A very important one that I'm sure we will continue to have. Thank you for your time as always. She's the Clinical Director of the Teddy Bear Foundation for Abused Children.